Hey, good morning. No, afternoon. It's 1:07 in the afternoon. You can tell how busy my day has been so far, but I'm sure yours has been too, and I'm sure it is because it is Monday, and I know that there are a good few of you who have some assignments to finish up before you fall asleep tonight, so I'm looking forward to read those. But hey, welcome. We are officially moving forward, and we are moving into our Module 5 space. So we are every day just closer and closer to getting down the hill of this course. And I want to thank you all for your efforts so far. I've been able to grade everything through Module 3, and I'll begin grading items from Module 2 as soon as, or I'm sorry, from Module 4 as soon as you submit them today and finalize those today, and I'll begin grading those throughout this week. So just thank you. Thank you for all of that hard work. Really, I've really enjoyed reading your poetry analysis most recently and how you were trying to handle that. As you look at my comments and feedback, as you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me through email, and I can work to support you and help you beyond the learning materials that I'm providing you. So to that end, let's look quickly at what you have to do for Module 5, and I want to give you a couple of tips for how to be successful within the character analysis, or I'm sorry, the comparative analysis with a focus on characters that will be due as our bigger assignment for Module 5. Okay. So, when we look at Module 5, here are our learning goals. So, we have looked at a decent amount of epics already, epic poetry already, and we're just focusing, leaning in more into that space for this week with some other examples and other examples based on both Western and non-Western um, uh, core readings. So, we are going to be reading a few different texts. Let's see here, a few different main texts. You can see here that we are going to read this Sunjata epic that is all the way in volume C. Okay, so that is the important thing. In our textbook, right in here, I'm reading through some metamorphoses that we have from Ovid. That is our other big reading for this week. But volume C is all the way down here. You've got to keep going. So go all the way down to volume C to find that story, or that epic poem delivering that narrative there. And so you can see here that we're going to have two big chunks of epic poetry to read. The front matter and story of Sunjata, and then 42 pages of the metamorphoses. The fun thing about dealing with world literature is that you, as a native English speaker, almost always mess up the pronunciation in some way. So I always do, and but we try our best and we move forward. So those are our two main texts, and you want to start reading those as soon as you can. And then we have this comparative analysis piece and a modern day performance of the Sunjata epic, if you're interested in watching that, which is pretty cool. This listen and explore space, the translation bit, really interesting to me and might be interesting to you as well. I want to give a shout out for to the student who let me know. I can't remember who just did now, and I can't go back to my email, but thank you to you if you're watching this overview video, and you hopefully are, for noting that this original link was broken. So I've updated it to a Britannica link, which I've actually misspelled here, one T and two N's. So we're going to mispronounce things and we're going to have typos. That's just par for the course. But this will take you and will provide some more definitions of the epic and characteristics and things like that. Just it's really making sure that we're very comfortable and familiar with that particular uh, literature because it is so important for these ancient religious texts that have stood the test of time and we still engage with today. You've got quizzes, of course, a quiz specifically related to an epic poem that'll be very surprised if any of us have read before. That's why I've picked it. And if you're like, oh shoot, I don't want to read this. I want to read more like Dante's Inferno or something like that. You should go read Dante's Inferno if you have the time. I could have brought in some excerpts of Dante's Inferno, but we've only been able to read excerpts, and at least with this, we're able to read all of this translated version, which is nice. But now for our discussion. So the discussion this week, where hey, I'm picking on you or you're raising your hand, um, you're going to do this. Okay, you're going to answer both of these questions using your knowledge in epic poems and remembering the first epic poem you read all the way back in Module 1. How are characters from the various epics similar or different from one another? How are they, uh, what do those character differences, similarities have to say about the societies in which they are written? So again, trying to place that cultural lens and that historical lens over the work that we're reading. And now we're going beyond just thinking of one text, we're thinking of multiple texts and how they seem to align or not with one another and what that might say. So that's what we have happening here for us. And that will help you as you work on your bigger assignment for this week. So you are going to build a character comparative analysis. Well, what does that mean? So that means you're just really looking at characters that exist within two different epics. They could be main characters or not. One could be a main character, one could be a minor character. And you are going to, after you've done that, you're going to think about how those characters are similar and different from one another. You want to try to focus on at least one or two interesting pieces about them, and then you're going to write a short comparative analysis of those characters, remembering to avoid only summarizing things, but working to analyze them. So pushing forward. So we can't just say X character is similar to Y character. Of course, we've got to go beyond that. How are they similar? Why are they similar? How can you prove that? What language can you pull in to help exemplify those similarities or differences to prove your claim that they are similar or different and or different in these ways. Of course, you have a couple of different ways you can present that information for us, for me. I'm your primary reader. And several of you are using more slideshows, which is kind of interesting, and you're still reaching that 400 words, but you clearly prefer a more like visual style, and that's cool. That's completely fine. Of course, your final essay will be in an essay form. And I know most of us are still writing short academic papers because that's what we're used to. Okay, now it notes that you want to choose two characters from this week's reading. And so I do want you to try to focus on pulling characters from Sunjata and the Metamorphoses. Um, you may or may not struggle with that. And if you feel really called to writing about something, has to be something from this week and something from a previous week, that can be okay. All right. So I know it says ask the instructor about it. Well, I'm letting you know now that it can be okay if you want to only pick one character from this week's reading rather than two, but maybe there's something that really kind of tickles your memory about a character from a previous epic that we've read, and you want to go back and focus on them as well. That can be okay. But see if you can keep it within this week's reading. All right. So going back to the checklist, again, always think that the time estimates here uh, are greater than they would normally be, but of course we'd be within in class 6 hours a week. So if you were in my class for 6 hours a week and you couldn't do anything else but focus on our course, what's the thing that you want to focus on most? Well, you want to really focus on reading those selected epics first. It's not going to take you 4 hours to read through those. It might take you about two, though, to read through both, looking about 80 pages, maybe two and a half, if you're reading them and you're annotating as you go, meaning you're reading for a couple pages, stopping, writing a sentence or two. So that way you remember what you're reading. And also you have this knowledge in your mind that you're trying to think of characters, focusing on a character, key character that jumps out to you and writing some information about them, knowing that you're going to have to compare and contrast them with another character let that be part of your note-taking process. But so maybe 2 to 3 hours focusing just on our reading and our comparative analysis instructions and literary character analysis, things like that. So half of your 6 hours this week should be focused there. And then the other half should be focused on completing the discussion, of course, completing the quizzes, and that character analysis assignment. So I think that within 6 hours, you can get through, so what you would normally spend in class without any homework outside of class, you should be able to get through the majority of the materials or all of the materials this week. Um, but then you can see here, it says, hey, work on that literary analysis paper because the first draft is due in Module 6. All of your extra time this week should shift the attention to that literary analysis essay. So this first draft, okay, so getting at least 500 words of that essay and getting it moving will be due in Module 6. So if you're able to get ahead of that, getting some words down, you're able to lean into getting additional feedback from things like our free online tutoring space, which is BrainFuse, which I highly recommend that you use. It's free for you. You're getting more feedback there, you're growing, you're getting some ideas down on the page that I can start to look at as I grade your Module 6 materials. Um, that's where all of your attention should be next, after you're done with these top pieces. Okay. This video has been a little bit longer than usual, so I apologize for that. But because we're on this downslope now and we're moving down, we're just moving closer and closer to the biggest assignment of the term, which is 20% of the grade. And so we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to put ourselves in the best position to do well. And I think that you will do well if you continue to do what you know will make you successful. Budgeting your time, using things like tomato timers to help you focus, the Pomodoro technique, focusing on the reading and learning materials first and trying to take notes, reading for a while, take some notes, read for a while, take some active reading, asking me questions as soon as you have them, not waiting until Friday where I might not see your email until Monday morning, right? Um, and trusting yourself, trusting that you can do this. You just have to follow the instructions and try your best, and likely you're going to succeed. So thank you for your work. Thank you for all of the time that you are putting into our class and in supporting and helping yourself grow. Continue to do that with integrity. Continue to do that knowing that every time you read, every time you write, you're becoming smarter. You're becoming stronger in those skills because reading and writing are skills. And you're becoming a better thinker as you engage with these ancient texts and compare and contrast and do some of your own reader response work as you're moving through them. So again, just thanks so much for all you do. And I'll end this video now. Take good care.